There's this one video in particular by General Knowledge that caught my eye on why millions of Mexicans don't speak Spanish, and in the thumbnail it says 1.4 million speakers. I'm assuming he might be talking about some native language, either Nahuatl or something else. And someone who is half Mexican, it only makes sense that I will want to take a look at it. And if Rody is still in the chat, I'm sure he could give some 2 cents as well. So I think this would be a very interesting video to look at just on that merit alone. So yeah, this is our first time reacting to a general knowledge video. I mean, I've seen a few of his videos, like on my own time. It's been a while since I've seen one, but it'll be nice to see. So let's go ahead and get started.
The other day, I was watching an episode of Orange is the New Black, and one of the
What does that even mean? I've never heard of this show.
detainees on the show had a problem. Nobody at the prison spoke her language. They go through a whole process of being confused because she was from Mexico but didn't speak the language that everyone associates with that country, Spanish. Instead, she spoke Nahuatl.
Okay, I figured this would be the case.
This led me to go down a whole rabbit hole of Mexican languages and to find out what is maybe obvious to anyone from the country, but maybe not so much so for somebody outside of it like myself.
Yeah, it would be like someone from America just speaking Cherokee in that kind of context.
Mexico speaks a lot of languages that
Yeah, there's like a ton of them.
are not Spanish and are actually nothing close to Spanish at all. Now,
Yeah, and they're usually, it's like a various different Native American languages because Aztec and Mayans and all that.
now, don't get me wrong, Spanish is the de facto national language.
Right.
It's spoken by 90% of the population, but Mexico has such a big population, totaling at over 130 million people, that even minority languages end up having up to several thousands of speakers.
Yeah, I believe that the I don't remember what the native population of Mexico is. I know it's pretty substantial. It's like millions.
In several hundreds of thousands in some cases. And in fact, there are a lot of other languages. Most of them are indigenous, descendants of what was spoken throughout Mexico's regions before the country existed and before the Spanish arrived and colonized it. Today, there are 68 different official indigenous languages in the country. The biggest is Nahuatl. That's
Right.
the one spoken by the women in that series. With
Yes, the Nahuatl language is the one that was spoken by the Aztecs primarily. You think his boyfriend speaks Spanish or something? Here, Ra is Spanish for something.
1.6 million speakers.
Yeah.
Yucatec Maya has
And then that obviously is the language of the Mayans.
775,000 speakers. Zeltal has 589,000.
And these are very substantial numbers. Like, when you compare it to some other, I guess, native or minority languages, these are pretty large numbers.
And Tzotzil has another 550, with Mixtec having 526,000 speakers. But while those are the only 5 with over 500,000 speakers, and Nahuatl is the only one with over 1.5 million, the following ones, as you go down the chart, aren't at all irrelevant. There's Zapotec
Yeah, Zapotec.
at 490,000, and 10 others with between 100 and 300,000 speakers each.
I'm sure there's a lot of them that are just bilingual in general, even if that one lady that he mentioned earlier could only speak Nahuatl.
Of course, the majority of these people speak Spanish too.
Yeah.
The case shown in the series would be a rare exception of someone who is only fluent in the indigenous language.
Yeah, that's something that happens a lot even in other countries.
About 10% of the people of the country are.
It actually reminds me how, like, before, like, the early modern era, specifically, like, before the time of Napoleon, not everyone in France spoke quote-unquote French. Like, French as we understand it today specifically originated in Paris and is based on Parisian French. But much of the southern half of France spoke a completely different language before a certain point. And when they started standardizing everything, and Paris discovered this, they were like, no, that will not do. We gotta, how to say, Frenchify everything down there. And in fact, France hates anything within its borders that isn't French, which also includes the Bretons of the Brittany region of France, which is a predominantly Celtic area that does have some speakers of Breton in there, and France doesn't really like that. You want to know is how different they are from each other? You could say they're all different languages. Yes, Pennsylvania Dutch, English. Pennsylvania Dutch isn't even Dutch, it's technically German.
Like that. On the opposite end, you also have the least spoken indigenous languages, like Ixil, spoken by 117 people.
That would make it a very severely endangered language.
Kikapu, spoken by 62, or even Aguatec, with only a mere 20 alive speakers today. So this got me thinking, how did so many of these languages survive the Hispanicization of Mexico?
There's a number of reasons for this. One of the reasons is that the Catholic Church encouraged mixed race marriages as a means of propagating the faith, which is one of the reasons why Mexico has not only such a large native population, but such a large mixed population, because that was just something that the Catholic Church encouraged as a means of winning converts. Oh, there you are, Rhodey.
And why did some of them retain so many speakers, while others are spoken by only a handful?
My assumption is because certain ones like Nahuatl and Maya were much more prominent, but and others that were already like minority languages in that context. Yeah, I guess there's just a give and take. Yeah, we're looking at why millions of Mexicans don't speak Spanish.
I think to understand this fully, we need to understand not just the languages, but who speaks them and where they come from. The existence of so many...
Yeah, there's multiple language families that exist in Mexico. Like, I know that the Nahuatl language is part of the Uto-Aztecan family, which also includes the Hopi language, as well as some languages that are of the natives of Utah in particular. Yeah. They don't have... How many languages exist in the country? It's like, basically, they say that a language is really just a dialect with the military.
Indigenous languages in Mexico has, of course, to do with the history of the people that lived there before the Spanish and other Europeans arrived. So to understand them, we need to understand first the history of Mexico as a whole. Mexico's pre-Columbian period is very, very interesting. Mostly because the concept of a unified Mexico didn't really exist.
Yeah, there wasn't really anything substantial. Yeah, the way that they did things in Native America is very different from how they did things in Europe. Like, they didn't exactly have nation states or anything like that, but they did have like coalitions and confederations of various tribes and stuff. The biggest culture groups by the time of the Spaniards, and then usually. How many specific Bible translations exist? Well, there are multiple different versions of the Bible in English alone, so you could say that all of those are separate languages in that case.
So, what you had was a patchwork, or a collection of...
Yeah, you see here, these splotches, for whatever reason, these parts didn't belong to the Aztecs.
Ancient and small...
Yeah, the Zapotec.
Independent kingdoms, some more powerful than others.
Yeah, they would have arisen for 150 years, and a lot of would be Totonac.
Some in alliances, some in wars.
Purepecha.
And each of them speaking their own languages.
Right.
The most famous of these languages is Nahuatl.
Yeah, that's something that the Aztecs wanted to do.
Which was the language of the Mexica people.
It's Mexica, actually.
Built the famous and most powerful of all these cultures, the Aztec Empire.
Yeah.
It was centered in the Valley of Mexico at Tenochtitlan. The Mexican
Tenochtitlan
used Nahuatl as a language, but also as a tool of imperial administration, because they were so powerful. They conquered or exacted tribute from so many of the other surrounding groups. And so Nahuatl spread far beyond its original borders and its original group of speakers,
Right.
reaching very deep into the south and even down to Central America
Yeah, even as far south as that.
in some cases. But the Aztecs didn't replace everybody else's language with
Yeah, a lot of other languages were already in existence. It's just that the Nahuatl language was just like, it's a lingua franca, where it pretty much exists throughout whatever country that it is, but not everyone necessarily speaks it.
they arrived. They sort of sat on top of a pile of diverse cultures. There was no
Yeah.
need for them to get rid of the other languages. And so they kind of
All that matters is that you paid your tribute.
existed side by side. This helped all the other minor languages survive too. For instance, to their west was the Purepecha Empire, also known as the Tarascan state.
Yeah.
The Purepecha spoke a language that is what linguists call an islet, meaning that
Yeah, which means it's unrelated to other languages,
it has no known relationship to any other language in the world.
at least as far as we know.
They were kind of the strongest rivals of the Aztecs. They successfully defended their borders. They actually used a type of advanced metallurgy. It's pretty fascinating, and it was kind of rare throughout the Americas. But anyway, this ensured that their language remained dominant in the region that is now Michoacan. And I think it's interesting that we go a little bit throughout the country of Mexico today and understand where each old or ancient culture existed and what languages they used, because those are the languages that in many cases served.
Yeah, everyone was taking. Just not just the Aztecs. It was that they were winning so hard they went from underdogs to the top of the military. Yeah, and regarding this, I'm sure there's a correlation between like even the modern geography of Mexico and what it once was back then.
Survive today. Further south and east, the landscape was dominated by the various Mayan languages,
The Mayas.
which were tied to the remnants of the great classic Maya city-states, which we often call the Mayan Empire. They weren't really an empire.
Yeah, they weren't an empire. It's better just to call them the Mayan civilization. They were older than the Aztecs, I'm pretty
but
sure.
That's not what this video is about. They spoke this set of languages.
Yeah, and those languages are still there too.
In the Yucatan Peninsula, the Yucatec Maya language was the standard, spoken across a series of petty kingdoms, or Cuchacabalob, like
Cuchcabalop, something like
Maya
that.
and Sotuta. These were independent provinces that shared a common culture and language, but
Yeah, so it was more like a confederation than anything else.
were often at war with one another too.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in the highlands of what is now Chiapas and Guatemala, groups like the Quiche and the Cachiquel, by the way, I'm probably mispronouncing them,
Cachiquel, something like that.
they maintained their own kingdoms with this.
It wouldn't surprise me if this Q was uvular, about 400 years older. Yeah. Yeah, but as the media wants us to believe, all those people were peaceful, even though within the land, until the why, or this one bitch would pronounce it like a bitch.
Distinct but related.
Yeah, they were sometimes people were. All land is technically like. I mean, technically, we all originated in Africa, so why don't we just take the entirety of the human race and just put us back in Ethiopia specifically? I'm pretty sure we could fit a whole 8 billion people in Ethiopia alone.
Mayan languages. Their languages served as sort of the primary vehicle for their sophisticated astronomical, scientifical, and historical records, such as the Popol Vuh, which is a sort of
Yes, I know about the Popol Vuh.
mythological but also historical record of their existence as a people. Then, in the rugged terrain of Oaxaca, the
Oaxaca.
Zapotec and the Mixtec cultures created a very dense competing network of city-states.
Yeah.
The Zapotec, centered around Monte Alban and later Mitla, used various Zapotecan languages that are part of the Oto-Manguian family.
Is that family related to Aztec or nah? Because this little TL that you often see within like various Aztec words, it sounds like it's like if you know like cartoon characters who pronounce their S's like this, it's basically that consonant. That is a consonant of its own right. It is the voiceless lateral alveolar fricative. And this is specifically an affricated version that's, rather than just simply, it's like a CH, but you pronounce it like that stereotypical lisp.
And speaking of that family, it's important to note that these 68 languages are grouped into less families. There's essentially 11 of them. The Mayan city-states are a good example of that.
Yeah,
they
were great in sciences, and then they had their own concept of zero. That's pretty cool. I know that here in the old world, I think the concept of zero was developed in India specifically, right? And then here the Mayans developed it on their own. It's funny how that happens, right? Where these different cultures, thousands of miles apart, all just independently come up with strikingly similar systems. I mean, we could even within like the Americas, there are plenty of like monumental structures that go back over 4,000 years. There's that one, the Corral civilization, I think it was, somewhere in South America. That's like 4,000 years old. It was either 4,000 or 2,000, one or the other.
One family of their own.
And I think it was the Corral civilization. I might be mixing it up with something else. I think it was a site in Bolivia, or it was a site somewhere else. Correct me if I'm wrong.
This means that many of these multiple languages are somewhat mutually understandable, or
the Romans, they didn't have zero.
At least share a common identifiable heritage.
And I think India also came up with the concept of negative numbers, where they interpret it as being in debt more than anything else, whereas within Europe and the Middle East, negative numbers couldn't be negative.
This map shows us where they are.
Yeah.
Just near to Zapotec, the Mixtecs that I mentioned were famous for their essentially petty kingdoms, such as Tilatongo, Tutetepec, and each Mixtec king, or I think they called them Iya, ruled a small territory, and they had a version of a language of their own, or even their specific language entirely. Those languages were used in their famous codices. These sort of...
Oh yeah, I know about these. Like, each of these is technically like it's technically written language, but not the way that we would understand it.
Greenfold books that used pictographic writing to record the genealogies.
Yes.
And the conquests of their rulers. But because the geography of Oaxaca is so mountainous, these small kingdoms often stayed relatively isolated.
Yeah, that's actually what happened with like various cultures across the Caucasus Mountains, and why there's like 3 to 4 distinct language families that exist there. There's the Northwest Caucasian languages, the Northeast Caucasian languages. Then there's Georgian, which is part of a family of its own. Then there's Armenian, which is an Indo-European language, and then Azerbaijani, which is a Turkic language. Yeah, multiple places around the world have dragons, which there is an idea that it might relate to, like, more ancient it might be, like, they may have known about, it might be dinosaur related, like, the dragons are secretly just dinosaurs that they may or may not have discovered back then, but there's no way to know for sure.
Which is why there are so many different, mutually unintelligible.
Yeah, and that's what happened with like the North Caucasian languages. It's 2 distinct language families, yet they're both right next to each other. But because the Caucasus is already so mountainous, it allows for that kind of linguistic diversity just in general. Yeah, the written languages are more similar to ideograms. Yeah, I know that. What was it? Is it that one Aztec writing system where it's like a sign is like has layers on top of each other, and those layers have specific features to them?
Varieties of Zapotec and Mixtec spoken in those same mountains today. It's similar to why...
Oh yes, New Guinea also has a lot of languages because of its mountainous terrain.
New Guinea also has so many unique languages. We covered it in a previous video.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, and it's also because of the mountains.
The communities are so isolated by mountains, forts, and rivers that so many different languages develop.
Yeah.
In the Gulf Coast, the Totonac and Huastec peoples held their own territories too. The Totonac were centered around cities like El Tajín and later Zempoala, and they spoke their own languages. They were among the first to encounter the Spanish and were quick to ally with them to escape the heavy tribute demands that they exerted on the Aztecs, for instance.
Yeah, that's something that happened when the Spanish first came to Mexico is like there were a lot of tribes and nations that were under Aztec rule that were not that big fans of the Aztecs, and so they were willing to ally with the Spanish just so they wouldn't have to deal with them.
But they suffered with colonization nonetheless. Further north, the Huastecs represented a pretty interesting linguistic mystery in the middle of all of this. They spoke a Mayan language, despite...
Oh, yeah, that's something that also happens where you'll find a certain language heartland where most of them are spoken, and then there's just one branch of that language or some dialect that's just spoken in a completely different area. Like, there are a number of examples of this type of thing, like Romanian is a good example. It's the only Romance language that is like in Eastern Europe that's completely detached from the other Romance languages. And then there are some Dravidian languages that are spoken in Pakistan, even though most Dravidian languages are spoken in southern India.
Being geographically separated from the rest of the Mayan world by hundreds of kilometers.
Yeah.
The reason why seems to be that they just came from the same place.
They just decided that they wanted to live there. They thought that that place was better. No, we don't need this crater-ass peninsula. No, we'll be here
A
instead.
long time ago, and their geographical isolation allowed them to keep those linguistic features from where they came from.
One of the only things that was meant to be pronounced are the toponymics. Yeah. The glyph is a pronunciation for places and the names. Yeah, that's how it can work with some languages like Chinese, where you know that a certain character has a specific meaning and pronunciation, but sometimes you'll use it solely for its pronunciation, and they typically use that for loan words.
Even though they were surrounded by other cultures.
Yeah.
In the northern reaches, the territory was less about those massive stone cities that we associate with the Aztecs, and more about the Chichimeca nations, a term that the Aztecs used for a group of nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples. This included the Otomi, who lived on the fringes of the Central Empires. They spoke an Otomanguean language.
Okay, and it's related to the one further south.
The Otomi were often utilized as a kind of mercenary warrior company type of thing, both by the Aztecs and later the Spanish. And interestingly, this helped their language persist in the Central Highlands because...
Yeah, if they have that much help from even the Spanish, then...
Since they fought on both sides, they were usually seen as useful by both sides too. And
they don't care who they ally with. All that matters is that they get to speak their language.
Weren't really conquered and replaced culturally and linguistically. And just to wrap it up, further north were the Haramuri or Tarahumara. Many of these have different names.
Yeah.
In the canyons of Chihuahua and the Yaqui.
Yeah, if it's in the canyon, then obviously it's still more mountains.
Along the rivers of Sonora. These groups didn't really have kingdoms in the European sense, but they were organized into, kind of autonomous communities.
Right.
Their languages belong to the Utu Aztecan family.
So that means they're related to the Aztecs.
Making them kind of distant relatives of the Nahuatl speakers to the
Right.
south. All of this is really interesting, but of course that when the Spanish arrived and started conquering these territories, they brought Spanish along with them. It became the new administration language, the tax language, the military language.
Yeah.
As well as the language of education moving.
Yeah, most of what we have is obviously a combination of oral tradition and from Catholic missionaries. Like, that's what the Popol Vuh was, right? It was written down by missionaries.
Forward. At the same time,
they wanted to adapt Catholicism in order to be more palpable to the native population.
Thousands, if not millions, of speakers of the native languages died out due to war or disease, reducing the number of those native speakers. But still, not enough death or Hispanicization took place for them to disappear entirely. And
they still maintain themselves even after a while.
So we can understand why so many exist up to today. It's because of the fact that Mexico wasn't unified, and its many communities were geographically isolated. But the survival is what is most fascinating to me. When European diseases like smallpox and typhus decimated the main settlements, the survivors often retreated further into what was called the Tierra Caliente, or the
Why is he pronouncing the R as if it's French? Tierra Caliente.
Deep Mountains,
the heat
where
mountains.
The Spanish found it too difficult or too expensive to follow.
Yeah.
And in these remote refuges, the native languages survived too. Furthermore, many indigenous groups were kind of masters of what you could call a selective adaptation. They would adopt Spanish names, convert to Catholicism to satisfy the colonial authorities, but they continue to conduct their internal community business, their traditional agricultural rituals, and their family.
Yeah, that's something that happens a lot in even other cultures. They'll, in their outwardly form, they will appear to adhere to whatever the predominant culture is at the time, but then while at the same time preserving their own cultures.
Lives entirely in their mother native tongues.
Yeah.
It's interesting because similar things happened in Europe, even in Spain specifically.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
When the crown expelled all the Jews or forced Muslims to convert to Christianity, persecuting them with the Inquisition, many of them did in public convert to Christianity.
Yeah, that's another example of that.
But continue to practice their original religion.
The secret Passover Seder.
In secret, or at least in private. This was a similar case with language, because the Spanish were often satisfied with that outward display of loyalty and the payment of tribute. They didn't really police what was being said in the private homes of the pueblos.
More or less.
And this allowed the languages to stay alive in the domestic sphere, passed down from mother to child as a sort of inheritance that the Spanish swords and the European plagues couldn't touch.
Yeah, and even then, there's a lot of traditions that are still practiced today throughout Mexico that do have, like, native roots, like Dia de los Muertos has, like, partial native roots.
Even as the population crashed, the density of speakers in places like the Yucatan or the Oaxacan valleys remained high enough that the linguistic landscape never fully turned entirely Spanish.
Yeah, even when it comes to like the native population, I mentioned earlier in the video that there's still millions of natives that not only do, well, I'm sure not all of them are like pure-blooded, but I'm sure a lot of them are still like majority native in terms of their ancestry, but like at least 60% of Mexico's population is mixed white and native.
Created a cultural resilience that allowed the languages to bounce back as the populations eventually recovered. So, okay, we understand why there are so many of them, the fact that Mexico wasn't unified, and the geographical isolation of those previous ancient kingdoms, and we understand how they survived because, well, the Spanish didn't really care.
Yeah, an explanation of why, because almost all of them had been practicing spiritual conquest for centuries.
Fair enough to erase them, or they weren't able to. But what do the...
So it was just another one of those things, or it's just like, oh, it's just another thing that we can follow,
actually
or something like, or am I misunderstanding?
Sound like today. Comparing these languages to...
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, when it comes to what they used to sound like compared to what they sound like now, also, yeah, carried, yeah, lots of, yes, there's a lot of mixing and syncretism. All that matters is that all that mattered to the church was that you identified as such, even if you didn't necessarily practice exactly the same way. I'm sure there are some people that would have a problem with it, but yeah. Dude, the evil... No, you are oppressing yourself. But no, that's the thing. But going back to languages, yeah. Even back then, the way that the languages are spoken back then isn't going to be the way that it is now. I mean, you compare Old English to Modern English, and they are completely different languages by all definition. And the same thing, like, the difference between English and Old English is basically the difference between Italian and Latin.
Spanish kind of highlights how deeply different they are, and how they are tied to these specific pre-Columbian social structures.
Yeah.
Spanish vocabulary is, of course, heavily influenced by the European and Mediterranean world, with words like caballo or trigo that were brought over by the colonizers. In contrast, the indigenous languages have highly specialized vocabularies.
Yes, there's plenty of native vocabulary within Mexican Spanish that makes it different
for the
enough.
American landscape. For example, while the Spanish have a word cerro for a
cerro,
hill or mountain,
or cerro as they would say it in most of Spain.
Mountain, Zapotec uses different terms based on the mountain's relationship with the community.
Okay.
And its sacred status. In Nahuatl, the word for ruler is Tlatoani, which literally translates to the one who speaks, emphasizing that the power of their kings was rooted in the authority of their oratory skills. In terms of specific word comparisons, the way these languages handle identity is pretty unique too. In Spanish, the word for person is persona, but in many lying languages, the word is winik. But it often carries a connotation of being part of a larger community or what you could translate as a true human who follows the tradition.
Or like, you don't forget the original, but you pray to more honor the stronger. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I think that's how it actually works in like Africa, like what was it, Jamaican voodoo or something like that, where where a lot of the people will pray to like different intermediaries, like angels and stuff, while only saving like God with a capital G for like specific things in particular. But yeah, you got this copy. Yeah, it was what they did. Yeah, it was one of those things. It's where where religion is more something that you do rather than something that you believe. Even if belief can be considered a big part of it. Like I know that defining religion as a belief system is more of a Protestant way of thinking, but what you do with that faith is just as important as what you actually believe. Yeah, but you got a copy from the 1500s or whatever. The only word you recognize was woman, even though you concentrate hard enough. Ah, yeah. That they did to other places as well. That's what the people under Mesopotamia. What was I? Oh, yeah. No, with regards to what I was mentioning earlier, I know that in Japan, even though the vast majority of Japan is non-religious, they still practice like various Shinto customs, especially when they visit shrines and stuff. They always, there's a ritual washing that's a big part of the Shinto ritual. They'll still practice those rituals all the time, even if they don't necessarily believe in like the kami and stuff.
Of the ancestors. The word for earth in Spanish is tierra, focusing on the soil. In Mixtec, the word for land or earth is nu'un, which is often the same root used for village and people, showing
that actually reminds me of the Proto-Indo-European word for earth, which, well, one of them is reconstructed as tekyom, which tends to be the origin of various words for human. Like, I know that it's the origin of Latin humus, and is related to homo, as in homo sapien.
That for the Mixtec kingdoms, there was no separation between the soil, the town, and the people who lived there.
Yes, I actually understand. I can make a connection to how, like, Adam is made from the dust of the earth. And so to equate the earth to the people, you could make that kind of connection. And obviously, the biblical Adam is not the only instance of people being made from clay. I know there's the ancient Chinese creation story of Nue, the goddess Nue, that also fashioned people out of clay. So to say that we are from the earth, that we are denizens of the earth, right? Like even in when like I remember in like Guardians of the Galaxy, people from Earth are called Terrans. So
and when you compare the languages with each other, you also understand they differ a lot too, even between these indigenous ones. While they share a common geographic space, they are mostly not actually related to one another. An Nahuatl speaker and a Maya speaker belong to linguistic worlds that are as different as English and Chinese.
Yeah, that's another thing, is that when it comes to like Native Americans, people would like to assume that all Native Americans are somehow just one homogenous culture, but that would be the same. Yeah, calling all Native Americans like one and the same culture is like calling Spanish from Spain and Germans one culture. And it's one of those, when people accuse you of not being able to tell the difference between a Chinese and a Japanese person, but you try to ask them, okay, well, what's the difference? Well, point out which of these people is French and which is German, and then they try to identify which one's French and which is German, only to find out it's a gotcha. This guy is Dutch, and that other guy is Polish. So yeah, it's more like a part of, Japan, it's more like the civil religion because it's part of the identity. Yeah, introducing these things in a more rational society. Yeah.
They might share a common heritage at some point in the past of where their ancestors came from.
Yeah, in that case, it would be like the whole Bering land bridge migrations.
But their usage by communities that were so unique in other aspects of their existence, and so isolated geographically and politically, contributed to their evolution in completely different ways.
Yeah.
And all of those linguistic features show that the languages didn't just survive by accident. They were
Yeah.
the essential operating systems for these petty kingdoms and empires, designed to describe a world of sacred mountains, communal land, and royal lineages that existed long before a single word of Spanish was ever spoken in Mexico, or
Right.
all of the Americas for that matter. And while Spanish is the most spoken language there today, many of these languages remain as proof of the region's pre-colonial history.
Yeah.
Many of them are declining. Many others are still spoken by enough people to resist for at least many decades to come. So I guess we're gonna have to wait to see if these
what will happen.
linguistic remnants of pre-Columbian Mexico survive.
I'm sure they will survive. If they've been here for this long and knowing how the internet works today, I'm sure there are plenty of people that want to preserve these languages for ages to come, even if they're not going to be like widely spoken or even taught in schools. I don't know if they would teach native languages in Mexico or at all. I know they'll do that in some parts of the world where there's some regional language that they'll also teach in school, but yeah. That's suppose one group is evil and white, and the other must vote, or they must vote, for what you believe is good, or else. Yeah, it rules for me and not for thee. Okay, yeah. I actually really enjoyed that video. That was very fun. It's nice to learn more about your own. It's nice to learn more about your roots, even if you don't know that much about them in the first place. So, it's very nice to get to know more.